how's it going, everyone? Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Music Review Podcast. Today, we are going to delve into our third series on this podcast and do episode two of Worth a Listen. I think it's a nice time to do another Worth a Listen, and I think it fits in real nice with what is going on this channel, being that our last review was over the Nick Hexum and George Clanton album, self-titled album, um, and that being a album that's influenced in, I guess, some fashion by chillwave. And the album that we will be covering today is Toro y Moi's album "Anything in Return," an album that I've grew fond of over the years, and that kind of grew on me in my college years. And I guess the more I listened to it, the more I appreciated it over the years. It came out in 2013, so it's about 7 years old already, over 7 years old, I think. But yeah, before we get into the album, I guess, analysis and fun stuff, just make sure if you haven't, there's a new episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week out for August 8th. There'll be another one coming out pretty soon this week, and of course, like I mentioned before, the last album that I reviewed was the self-titled album by George Clanton and Nick Hexum. I thought it was a pretty great, entertaining album for what it was, and it was experimental. And if you're relatively interested in chillwave after listening to this, check out that album as well. I don't think you'll be disappointed. But let's get started. So, if this is your first time listening to the music reviewer, or if you're just tuning in for a worth a listen episode, um, all worth a listen is me going over an album that I think is well worth a listen. I'm not saying it's the best album in the world. I'm not saying that the album doesn't have problems. So this isn't like saying this is a classic. This is just really something I've listened to in my past that that is probably well known. Anything in Return is not a underground, super underground album. It's been featured. The tracks have been featured on many various forms of media, like GTA 5. It's one of the tracks off of Anything Returned is in Grand Theft Auto 5. So it's been promoted, and Chaz Bundick, Tori Maw at this point has grown substantially since then. This is the second episode of that series. What I do is just, like I said, go over an album that I think is worth a listen, and I'll tell you why it's worth a listen. This is episode two of that. The first episode was over the 2019 release by the Japanese House. I forgot the name of the album. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But if you haven't listened to that, worth a listen. I think that's a great album as well. So let's get started into the gist of this episode. Anything Returned, released 2013. If you're not familiar with Tori Moi, he is an American singer-songwriter, record producer, and also graphic designer, according to Wikipedia. He's credited with being one of the first pioneers in chillwave in the early 2010s. The chillwave thing, I'm gonna get into that, but it's not too essential to this album because I really think this album it kind of transcended that whole entire genre, and did a lot for what came after it. But anyways, Tori Maw, he's an American singer-songwriter and record producer. He's from South Carolina. I've enjoyed his records throughout the years. I think his most recent release wasn't something that I guess stuck around or didn't gravitate to me that hard like some of his other albums, but nonetheless, his releases are pretty much quality most of the time. He puts out a lot of music too. If you just go on his Spotify page, there's different variations of albums sometimes, or even mixtapes. He's a pretty talented guy. I'd say probably my favorite album would be Anything in Return, but I'm also uh, really fond of What For and his earlier material like Underneath the Pine and Causers of This. Um, but anyways, yeah, if Tori Maw is one of your favorite albums, I'm sure, or Tori Maw is one of your favorite artists, I'm sure you've listened to Anything in Return. It's probably considered by some his magnum opus. But anyways, we'll get into the chill wave stuff now. Um, And the reason why I'm talking about chill wave is because it's kind of synonymous with Toro y Moi, or his earlier career at least. And all chill wave was a subgenre of like synth pop and indie pop that kind of formed in the late 2000s with the I guess the quote unquote summer of chill wave that emerged in 2009 with the prominence of bands like Neon Indian, Tori Moi, and Washed Out. The genre is characterized as having like a retro electronic sound with elements of psychedelia, and dreamy aesthetics, and it's mainly achieved through samples and synthesizers and dreamy and I guess colorful production. It also is characterized with elements of mellow vocals. Chillwave is also seen as being a predecessor to vaporwave. If you're not familiar with vaporwave, it's kind of a similar genre that I talked about in the George Clanton and Nick Hexum review. Um, and basically, people that I guess have studied the phenomenon of chillwave kind of say that it's more of just a evolution of dream pop and shoegaze. And some even say the official start of it was released by Panda Bear of Animal Collective, his album Person Pitch, which an album I haven't listened to be honest, but I do like a lot of Panda Bear's music that I'm familiar with. Um, so basically, that was just a brief overview of what shoegaze is, or not shoegaze. I'm sorry, chillwave. And to be honest, I'm a little bit biased towards that kind of music. I am a fan of like these dreamy genres like dream pop, shoegaze and vaporwave and chillwave, but it's not all I listen to. If you've heard my other reviews, you know I have other interests. But I guess I was bound to just discover Tori Mall and eventually anything returned. So I think what the first time I discovered anything returned, I was either a second semester freshman or first semester sophomore in college, and um, that was 2013. So yeah, it makes sense because was released in January 2013. But anyways, yeah, I remember going to South by Southwest one year and seeing Tori Maw's name on a lot of bills, but me being an ignorant, punky, I guess snot-nosed, snobby-ish college freshman, I learned quickly that at South by Southwest, you can't just get into a lot of things. You either have to have a badge, be connected with the music industry, or just be 21 and up and wait in line for a ridiculous amounts of time just to see a band in 100-degree weather, sometimes, or just the rain. Springtime in Texas is very dynamic. But nonetheless, yeah, I don't think even from seeing the name all over the place during South by Southwest, I don't think I even made an attempt really to check out Tory Mall until one time I was just walking late at night to like study or something, and the mood was just right. I don't really know what it was, but I just put on one of the YouTube videos of the I think So Many Details track. Um, it was either So Many Details or let's see. It was either Say That or it was Say That actually, the second track on this song. And I was just kind of captured by the guy's quirkiness, the aesthetic, the confidence, and kind of like the typical nerdy look, but the swag that it pulled off in the music video. And of course, the music captivated me as well. It was something that I almost never heard of before. Before that, I was very into just indie and alternative rock, but it was just the typical bullshit that I guess anyone could get into. um, the 90s grunge, the Death Cab for Cutie, the Arctic Monkeys, stuff like that. But nonetheless, I'm really happy I stumbled upon Anything in Return. And yeah, Anything in Return was also released on Car Park Records, which I'm not going to sugarcoat this, but I think it's probably one of the most hipster labels out there right now. It's not a bad thing, but there's no way to get past that aesthetic. They have bands on there like Cloud Nothings, Palm, um, numerous other acts, the Beths, which I've listened to many of their music before, Speedy Ortiz. the offshoots of those bands even at time. Um, Madeline Kinney, which I might review her album here in a bit. Um, just very prominent indie acts that I guess a certain person will like, but nonetheless, some pretty good music still. Anyways, Anything in Return, released January 22nd, 2003, on Car Park Records. And Prior to that release, he did have those albums, like I mentioned before, Underneath the Pine and Causes of This, which I think are gems in themselves. But I think Anything in Return holds a little bit more prominence in the overall, I guess, influence it had after that. And when I say that, I think Anything in Return, since it's quoted by Toro y Moi as being something that's more poppy, and more accessible, purposely done that way. I really think it changed a lot of music afterwards, especially with its influence of uh, just like throwback 2000s pop and like R&B. And I think a lot of artists after that weren't afraid to delve into that kind of thing that maybe wasn't seen as cool prior to that. I don't think maybe we would have gotten a lot of I guess, the, the evolution of indie into like kind of like a huge pop subgenre in many respects. If this album might have not have come out, I don't think that might have not happened. This is all speculation. Someone could easily prove me wrong, but let's go through the album track by track, and I'll just try convincing you that it's worth a listen. The album opens up with Harmon Change. This is a great opener. It's a dramatic intro. There's some eerie synth textures, some prominent production. It's kind of like a heartbeat pulse and sound from that bass drum. Some heart tapping, clicking samples or sounds thrown in much of the beginning that is kind of just very trancy. The chorus is very pop like as well. There's catchy refrains that could probably be seen as being something that took influence from a lot of like mainstream pop music, with lyrics like "Cause you know me and I know you too." Something just very straightforward like that is captivating in this track. There's swells in the synths that kind of engulf the track too. Overall, I think it's a great opening track. But I'd say the next two tracks are probably some of the most strongest and on the album. You get the song Say That, which immediately starts off with like this two chord structure that immediately outlines the track. It's a really groovy track with like this unsteady bass line that kind of gives the track some opening energy, and the bass line kind of just like continues throughout the whole entire track. There's a breakdown that features some deep synths, bass synths um, and there's also like a sample of like a wailing woman. It's a very, I guess, artsy and ambient track. Um, and the track is very immersive and dreamlike as well. In the second verse, there's a synth counter melody that's thrown in that comes in and out, and again later in the outro. Um, there's the iconic line I think that says "She's all right, I'm all right, we can't go back." And then that's just something that immediately just sticks in your head when you hear that. Just like simple lyrical content like that, which I'm not trying to say it's really deep or anything, but it just that kind of just straightforwardness to me, it makes a decent pop song. The drum track is just solid throughout the whole entire track as well. Some really great use of drums. Um, and I think that's one of the highlights on this track. So many details is equally as captivating of a song. There's a hazy intro with these samples and lo-fi production techniques. The track then transitions to like a straightforward, groovy R&B song. Some lovely melodic bass grooves that give the track some texture. The hi hats sound great on this track as well. And then another like earwormy, catchy line that says, "You send my life into somewhere I can't describe." It's I don't know why it's captivating to me, but it's just simple and straightforward, and it doesn't try to be too much. There's some interesting old spoken word samples that seem like they could have been cut out from a movie. I don't really know. Um, and then some bright synth embellishments that are thrown in, some lush moments on the bridge with the synth tones, some Congo percussion that's thrown in the track to give the track like some more dynamics. I think it's one of the better tracks on the song, if not the best track. The next track that I think is pretty interesting is Rose Quartz. It follows immediately after So Many Details. And Rose Quartz probably has one of the best developing intros I've ever heard on a track. The pulsing bass drum gives the track a lot of structure, and then the layered guitar and like keyboard chord progressions just grow and grow, and more embellishments are layered and layered on top of that. There's some syncopated rhythms that give the track some groove. It also features the track features a synth counter melodies that are utilized here as well, and in the verses. Um, a small like note here, the snare that they used, that Toro y Moi used, can be a little bit overbearing, but it's not detrimental to the track, I think. And then overall, the song, as it progresses and grows, the song kind of just dies down like something losing momentum and energy and just dissipates. And I think it's a great track. Um, the album kind of cools down a little bit. There's some good tracks in between with Touch and Cola, but they're just more low key. Cola features some fuzzy bass synth tone colors in the track. It's more mid-tempo. Uh, it has like a hypnotic mood to it. But I don't think we get a highlight until the track after that on Studies. Studies is another very ambient and kind of like a immersive track. It has like a repetitive piano chord that's struck over and over at the beginning, and then like some falsetto vocals that soar over everything. A nice organic, some nice organic guitar tones that textured the track as well. A groovy bass line that just grooves the track quite well, and it's just kind of ostinato, and it just goes over and over again. Um, the verses are a change of character though, so there's some contrast, and the verses aren't as surreal sounding, but it keeps the track still keeps its charm. And then here on this track, you get that Congo auxiliary percussion that returns, and the percussion on this track is really on point as well. It's probably one of my favorite elements. Um, the chorus, the vocal line is sang with a different character as well, so no falsetto. So we just see some different techniques that are used on this track, and it just gives the album more, I guess, dynamic, dynamical contrast or just contrast. I'd say the next two tracks, High Living and Grown Up Calls, are a little bit more forgettable, but they're still great tracks. Grown Up Calls feature a bright vocal line, and these it also has these la 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 la's that fade out. It has a bit of a mysterious nature due to it, some sensitive embellishments thrown in. It has more of like an aggressive vocal performance as well, especially not in that pre-chorus. It's a convincing performance. I'd say I don't get. There's another highlight doesn't really happen until Cake, which is a very prominent that features very prominent synth chords that engulf the track. It has a bit of an immersiveness to it. It's very poppy in the aesthetic, especially in that vocal line. It just kind of throws back to like 90s boy bands almost. Um, the track has a lot of groove to it. It has lush textures and layers. The chorus is the bread and butter of the track, though. I think it when the song sounds biggest on this part, it's the best part of the track. And it also features a bouncy bass line. The song does kind of elongate itself, though, but it does feature a nice, pretty piano outro. And then we kind of get the closing end of the album when we get to day one. The track features a really straightforward drum track. It sounds really tight and punchy. Some experimental vocal lines with these held out notes at times that sound a bit aloof. The track features a lush synth texture, a keyboard chord progression that outlines the track as well, a nice steady bass line that helps give the track some steadiness. It also has some quirky synth runs and samples that are found in the bridge. The outro is really nice as well, and it adds more and more layers to that sort of aesthetic. Um, And then I guess Never Matter is more of this 90s boy band poppy aesthetic. It's a good track as well. It features a lot of old school indie EDM and influence as well. And How's It Wrong is another highlight. I think it's the closing track of the album. It features a bouncy, syncopated, and staccato synth tone that guides the track into like the intro. It has lush synth textures, has more of this early 2000s pop flair as well. Just something that you could have turned on the radio in the 2000s and wouldn't be surprised hearing. The track has a strong sense of grooviness as well. It is very densely layered. Um, there's a spacey mood and sound to it, some dreaminess that's thrown in as well, especially in the instrumental outro. So it has a surreal sounding nature to it as well. And the album ends on that note. Um, yeah, it's just a track that I think this is an album I think that is um, it's kind of held its own throughout the years. It doesn't sound dated either. Like I put it on and it doesn't necessarily give me a gist that it's from the 2010s or the early 2010s, but it sounds like it could be even something released today. Not to say that someone would pull it off as well. Like I think if you threw someone like The Weeknd on some of these tracks, no one would really bat an eye. They'd think he's just experimenting. Um, and their production on a lot of it is, I think, is quite nice as well. It can hold up to that sort of mainstream appeals as well, even though this was probably released as like an indie and more underground type of album. And I think its prominence in the mainstream can kind of attest to that. This is an album that I oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, but I've witnessed people credit that I would not expect to. And these are people that are avid hip hop listeners or something of that nature. And the track does have elements like of hip hop in it at times or R&B. So it's just an interesting album. It kind of has elements to where it could have probably been something that was released in the past. But if it was released today, I think it would be equally as fitting. But just an interesting album. He kind of changed his sound after this. He's kind of an artist that changes it up album to album. But yeah, I don't think I've even. I mean, even though this is a somewhat of a chill wave album, I don't think I've heard anyone make something that is very similar to this as well. It's kind of an outlier. But yeah, if you made it to the end of this worth the listen, hopefully you consider this album and give it a listen. But yeah, thanks for joining me on this episode. I'm a music reviewer, and thanks for listening. I'll see you guys soon.